So that's why now I'm very happy to give the floor to Professor Campana. Paolo, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be with all of you tonight. And well, to say a few words about the report and this issue of online technology facilitated trafficking in human beings. I complement very well Don Fortunato talk, because Don Fortunato look at child sexual exploitation, that's the Meter Association. The report look at sexual and labor exploitation of adult victims. Although there are similarities in what I'm going to say that resonates with what Don Fortunato just said, but the subject of the study is different. So I should make this clear. There are other reports from the Council of Europe, and particularly the Lanzarote Convention, that have looked at the child sexual exploitation. In the Council of Europe, there are two different conventions that deal with minor or adults. Now, the report that it's available in the handouts is fairly broad, so covers a vast number of issues that is a testimony of the complexity of this overall issue of technology and THB. Now, unfortunately, as the report makes clear, and as many of you know through your experience, there is not a silver bullet, a single action that we can take and then solve the problem. But we can try to understand what are the sources of the problem, and then try to understand which actions we can put in place. Some of them are easier to implement, and others are more difficult, but nonetheless important. Now, let me start with just give you an overview of the impact of technology on THB. Now, what the study, and the study was based on questionnaires that were sent to state parties, so state parties to the THB convention, as well as NGOs and tech companies. Now, what is the landscape? Well, the landscape we are part of, it's a landscape shaped by technology in many forms. And this goes beyond THB. We have, we are here using technology. Technology is bringing us together and giving us the possibility to discuss this issue while we are in our offices, in our homes, all over the world. So technology has really changed the modus operandi of academics, international institutions, as well as offenders. What has happened? Well, first of all, we see an increasing relevance of online materials, online advertisement, online and the usual usage of on website and apps in the search of jobs and in the search for establishing friendship and meeting new people. Now, of course, this creates opportunities, like legitimate opportunities, so circulation of information can be good, but it also creates opportunities for traffickers. And this double-edged sword makes things very difficult. So while for child sexual exploitation, we can use automating system to detect images of children, and then we can with a very high level of confidence, say that that is an image belonging to a children. When we move to the adult THB, things becomes much more complicated. And the use of automated procedure to disentangle and separate legitimate use of online spaces and job advertisement from the use of online spaces, job advertisement, and up for the purpose of THB becomes much more complicated and complex. Interesting, already in the report, and this was done before the war in Ukraine, we picked up evidence of web pages meant to foster information exchange among migrants. So web pages set up by well-meaning people that wanted to help migrants to find jobs and better integrate in the hosting community. These web pages were targeted by traffickers. They would post fake jobs, or they would try to recruit victims in these spaces. Now, this was before the war in Ukraine and the large number of people that were displaced. What we also see, it's an increase in online socialization and personal interaction. This was accelerated by COVID. It was there before, it's been accelerated by COVID. And of course, this creates opportunity for traffickers. It also creates opportunities and the risk of blackmailing victims into trafficking. Technology, as was mentioned before, rightly so, also changed the modus operandi of the traffickers. For instance, the report has evidence of traffickers using technology to coordinate activities across countries, which basically means that we have evidence of victims exploited for sexual exploitation in one place, and the head of the group, of the organized crime group, living in a different place, effectively doing a sort of arbitrage between jurisdictions, choosing the jurisdictions where they feel safer as the jurisdictions where they decide to live, and the jurisdiction where they feel they can make more money out of the exploitation of the victim, as the jurisdiction where the exploitation happens. This is new, and this type of mechanism poses difficult legal challenges for countries, and increases at the same time the interdependencies between countries, the needs for coordinated actions and share the framework. Now, technology creates opportunity, but let's not forget, individual vulnerabilities are still there. Now, the technology doesn't create an entirely new world. Technology interacts with individual pre-existing vulnerabilities. So in a sense, we have to put technology in context with what we know about individual vulnerabilities. And the other important point that I think it's important to highlight is that the changes brought about by technology are structural changes, which require structural responses. Changes brought about by technology are here to stay. So there is no way back to a world, a pre-technological world where technologies, app, internet, digital evidence was not there. Digital evidence is here. People use technology. We, and I mean law enforcement, criminal justice, but also NGOs, we need to adapt to this new reality. What can be done? Well, first, let's have a quick look at what are the challenges that technology creates. The challenges are multiple and complex. There are challenges posed by the volume of online activities, the volume of online advertisement. These pose challenges in terms of monitoring. There are challenges in sorting and separating activities that are legitimate online activities from activities that are linked to THB. As I said, in the case of child sexual exploitation, technology offers some better solution where age detection algorithm with a level of confidence can spot images. But there is no algorithm at the moment, as to the best of my knowledge, that can easily identify, for instance, advertisement, online advertisement that are linked to THB. Algorithm and this big data procedure, so-called web crawlers, are important, can help, but they don't offer the magic solution. So in a sense, we need to have technology, but it's not enough. We need to have technology to fight the use of technology in the context of THB, but it's not enough. There are difficulties in identifying people online, identifying online identities, both of offenders and victims. The identification of victims in the case of THB is complex in any case, and people who work with NGOs know very well the difficulties in identifying victims. Technology adds a layer or adds complexity. There is the use of encryption. Encryption of technology and facilities makes the online monitoring of conversation for police purposes very complex. There are institutional complexity. For instance, police forces often lack specialized units that are trained in online investigations. They are trained in covert cyber investigations. Also, the lack of investigators that have both THB knowledge and IT skills. There is the lack of technical equipment. Technical equipment is very expensive. It's very expensive. It always comes with heavy price tags. There is also lack of training among prosecutors on the request that prosecutor might have to follow to request electronic evidence from private companies and other companies. I think in 2022, it is increasingly rare that a prosecutor or a police officer will not have to deal with digital evidence and electronic evidence, both in the case of THB, but beyond the THB. Don Fortunato mentioned this issue. We found it in the report as well. There are legal issues around IP addresses and the retention period for IP addresses. This is an issue that was picked up by many countries, and they said the data retention period for IP addresses are too short, and this can prevent investigations. So not only getting the evidence, but preserving the evidence. This is an important point. There is also an important point around fast-changing behavioral patterns. Now, modus operandi. There are changes in the modus operandi of offenders, but there are also broader changes in the modus operandi of the internet and technology users. Now, the technology field is a field characterized by fierce competition. Now, competition brings about change. Sometimes change is good, give us better products, give us more internet speeds and technological tools, but also changes the way we use the tools. Now, this poses a challenges for investigators and prosecutors, NGOs as well. They need to keep their knowledge up to date about the pattern, behavioral patterns out there. Now, what to do? Let me say just a few words about what to do. It looks like a gloomy picture, a complex picture. What can be done? Well, the report puts forward 21 recommendations. I just want to summarize a couple of them. First, we talk about technology. We talk about technological tools. Of course, there is a need to invest in technological tools, but there is also a strong need to invest in human capital. We need to develop digital knowledge, training, curriculum, and skills around the digital evidence. I'm thinking about law enforcement. 21st century law enforcement is not just made of sworn police officer with training in guns. It's also made by personnel that is trained in electronic evidence, internet monitoring, big data, cyber patrols, and digital undercover operations. Laboring, this is, we often think about sexual exploitation, but there is also labor exploitation. Laboring inspectorates, for instance, needs to develop digital expertise and increase online presence. And NGOs also need support. They need support to enhance their digital footprints and digital knowledge. Second, I think the NGOs and what Meter does, for instance, it's very important to create knowledge. Create knowledge, creates reports, and it is then disseminated. Now, training and capacity building is very important. Prosecutor also should be provided with training on technology facilitated THB and procedure to request electronic evidence. However, we cannot just prosecute our way out of this issue. We also need to design out opportunities for traffickers. There is an important point here that relates to enhancing online reporting confidential reporting mechanism, including chatbots, instant messaging, but also working with private companies to design content analytics so that users can flag up suspicious activities, but also users can get a pop-up and say, look, exactly as we do with frauds. Sometimes we get a pop-up that says, don't put your credit numbers into any field, online field. We can design similar mechanism that says, well, you have never interacted with this person. Be careful. Don't, in a sense, to raise awareness among the users. Of course, there is a role to play here for NGOs, private companies, to run initiatives to raise awareness on technology-related risks, exactly as we do with frauds, including how traffickers might exploit the technology, how potentially exploitative situations might begin. And I stress here the importance of breaking the chain from the beginning, before exploitative content can be produced, and then people can be blackmailed into trafficking. I think there are nice examples highlighting the reports of social advertising. So companies, I think, have a corporate social responsibility, and they should produce social advertising together with NGOs and other entities to target at-risk users and prevent victimizations. There were examples of social advertising done on Facebook, for instance. Couple of extra things. More, if you like, more medium term. I said that technology changes the landscape. We need to change the institutional design. If you think about how we have designed our institutions, knowledge, and I mentioned knowledge about digital evidence, digital policing, if you like, digital enforcement. There is one issue is generating this evidence, but there is a second issue, and it's deciding where this evidence sits. I see an increasing risk coming from bottlenecks in the system. There is this idea of separating cybercrime from THB. So there is cyber and there is THB. This is not how the world works. If you translate this into institutional design, there is a risk of thinking in silos. There is the THB unit and there is the cybercrime unit. The THB unit says, well, this is something for the cyber unit. I send it to the cyber unit. But if everyone sends requests to the cyber unit will collapse because the digital evidence is everywhere. Now, the cyber unit, of course, needs to deal with high-level, high-tech cyber attacks. But digital evidence needs to sit in at different points in the structure. And I want to stress this point because there is an issue with path dependency. Once you have designed a system in a way, that design sticks. It's very hard to change the institutional design. If we don't get it right from the beginning, then to go back and change the design is much more difficult than to design it in the first place. There is institutional memories. There is path dependencies. I come from, I work in an institution, the University of Cambridge, that is centuries old. And I can tell you that sometimes changing things is very difficult. Now, I want to finish on the issue that Don Fortunato also mentioned related to cooperation with private companies. Now, private companies have a big role to play. There are different types of private companies. Different companies have different type of information, which basically means that we need a different type of cooperation protocols with different types of companies. There are social network companies. There are also the so-called gig economy companies they are vulnerable to exploitation, labor exploitation. There are issues around the data sharing. There are issues around IP addresses that I mentioned before. Some issues are easier to solve than others. I think IP address and data retention, if there is a political will, that issue can be solved. The expansion of data retention period can be solved quite easily. Inverted comma. Others, when it comes to sharing of personal information across jurisdiction, that becomes much more difficult. And I can see there is a balance. Don Fortunato mentioned that in the case of child sexual exploitation, the child protection comes first. When it's adult THB, of course, we want to protect victims, but we also need to have measures that are proportionate. So in a sense, there is a balance, difficult balance to strike between measures that are not overly intrusive in the digital presence of all of us. We have to balance that with the protection and the identification of victims. So where do we strike this balance? It is difficult. but it's something that it is on the table for discussion, needs to be discussion, and we need to find the right balance. I think I stop here. We have 5 minutes for a short Q&A, and I'm looking forward to your questions. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Paolo, for your very substantial intervention and your appeal for coordinated action, and also for cooperation with private companies. I think it's very interesting. Of course, we would love to answer questions. As you know, there are a few of them. The first by Agnese Fiducia. Can you see her? She was suggesting Exodus Cry as an international organization against human trafficking, and she was also saying that nowadays not only the dark web, but also social networks, Telegram, WhatsApp, and the portal YouPorn, Pornhub, and OnlyFans, and to say cyber providers should be controlled and pornography blocked. Of course, it's a big question. I don't know. Do you have any comment on this?
Yes, I think so. There is an interesting point here, which is on the dark web.
Yes.
Now, there is a. I think I'm not an expert on child sexual exploitation, but based on what my knowledge on child sexual exploitation and the more expensive knowledge I have on all of THB, I think there is a major difference between child sexual exploitations and adult THB. Child sexual exploitation tends to happen or makes more use of hidden website, dark web, and closed websites. THB and I, in a sense, in the survey, we ask the direct questions: what is the role of dark web in the technology and the impact on THB? And it was very minimal. So in a sense, there is this major difference. THB, and when we talk about technology, it's not so much dark web, it's not so much cryptocurrencies. It's the web, is the tech that we all use, which makes it more complex. It would have been easier if there was just a specific type of web that we could just target that type of technology, and we would have high confidence that it was misused. The problem is these are exactly the same tool that we all use.
Yes. No. Thank you very much for those remarks. And actually, do you have any proposals to control what's going on those social networks, normal websites?
Well, that's a big issue, and it's open to debate of what is the responsibility of the social networks. Again, there is a major difference here between child sexual exploitation and adult sexual exploitation. When it comes to child sexual exploitation, I think all the major social network companies, as far as I know, they implement actions to identify the images, and they have reporting mechanism. It is more complex, also from a technological point of view, to moderate conversations outside this the child sexual exploitation. And I just want to give an example, which is a difficult one, which shows the complexity. Take a group on Facebook set up by a well-intentioned person wanted to help Italians. I'm Italian. Italians in Cambridge. Now, that group is moderated by one person, but receives a number of announcements. Now, that person has not the resources to control everything that is going on in that group. Now, that group is an easy target for traffickers. They can post announcement, identify victims, and then move the conversation privately. When you move it privately, are encrypted. So they are actually private conversations. What do you do at that point? Should Facebook monitor all private conversations of their users? That at that point there is no clear suspicions that there is or there's a link to THB. I suspect that you can have some algorithm that pick up some keywords, and that I think it's a good thing to do. But if these keywords are not used, then the algorithm will not be able to identify issues, contrary to images. Now, of course, you can have law enforcement saying to Facebook, look at that. But that's reactive. It's not proactive. This is an interesting example that just shows the complexity of the issue, both legally but also operationally. And how far do we want Facebook to go in monitoring conversations of the users, and how far do we want Facebook to? And this is a nice example because the group was set up by a person with no link to THB. It's easier for an algorithm to set up groups that are fake groups, and they are set up by people. Then, in a sense, the group is set up, offer scam jobs or fake or very suspicious job advertisement. This is something that you can proactively identify and shut down. But the other example, it's much more difficult. Now, you might want at that point, you might want to design a better system for reporting. Now, I might be contacted by someone, I flag it up. And in the report, Facebook, in their submission, that I thought it was very interesting in their submission, they mentioned that they receive a very limited amount of suspicious report related to THB. So people don't report it, which is maybe something that, again, I don't blame the people. Maybe it is the way it is designed, the system that doesn't make people think about THB and potentially report it.
I want to quote Valiant Ricci, OSCE Special Representative and Coordinator for Combating Trafficking in Human Beings. And we had a webinar on the 14th of June. Actually, this webinar, he was saying it is also important to address and to dismantle the infrastructure that is facilitating all of this. The online platforms, the sexual service websites, the pornography platforms where people are trafficked for forced pornography or other locations need to be dismantled, or prevention measures need to be applied to make sure that these platforms are not facilitating and making this whole exploitative industry much more efficient. It's like operating a bookstore versus operating Amazon. The difference between the speed and efficiency and scale of the online market is so tremendous that if you don't dismantle that infrastructure, you're going to have a very, very hard time combating it. I think there is a number of things I could say in this, but that would be the number one thing that I think needs to go alongside of the policies against buying and selling of sex or around traffickers and how they should be punished. End of quote. But I think indeed what we should plan is to say you are strongly all encouraged to visit are two webinars of the 14th and 28th of June of this year on demand and HT and justice and human trafficking. You can watch the video recordings and read the transcript in English and 6 other languages, including Spanish, Italian, and French. And we should organize another webinar, and possibly also with you, Paolo, to discuss approaches to develop practical and legal measures in order to prevent and combat trafficking in persons, because I think it's indeed a very complex and pressing issue. I agree with many comments on the chat or on question and answers. We are all afraid about this monster, and we don't know how to deal with it. But Paolo, you have anything to add to my comment?
Well, that your comments and what Richie said, that opens a big issue.
Yeah.
The Council Euro report, in a sense, we look at technology, and that it's a separate issue about prostitution. Yeah. And different countries within Council of Europe also have different views on prostitution in general, and whether this should be criminalized or not. There are different sensitivities there. My work hasn't looked at that aspect. In a sense, it's an additional aspect. I know that Richie and colleague at OSCE, they have an abolitionist approach. Some countries have an abolitionist approach. Some NGOs have it as well. In the study, I don't take a position between the two approaches. Of course, it is there. I mean, for certain type of website, they are clearly so there are websites. Some countries, also in the report, the submissions from the countries are there are different views. So some countries are strongly against shutting down website completely, and they will say, in fact, keeping it open and working with the website. Others are for shutting down websites. This is actually a very long, difficult questions. I would also add that that's part of the story, but you also have technology that it's that traffickers use, and it's not linked to sexual services. For instance, it's everyday technology. So dismantling that infrastructure, it is complicated, because that means dismantling the infrastructure that we all use. That opens other issues, like I was saying. It's an issue of designing the infrastructure differently, implementing or implementing a check within the infrastructure, increasing the awareness of the people that use that infrastructure. So again, I'm glad you put these issues on the table, because clearly it is an issue. It needs to be discussed, and it is complex. So I just want to convey again the complexity of this issue and the complexity of the infrastructure.
Oh, no, thank you very much. And actually, I wanted just to add that, of course, you have observatories. And I would like to mention in Canada, the Canadian Centre for Child Protection, Centre Canadien de Protection de l'Enfance, which pilots Project Arachnid and the Canadian tip line for reporting the sexual abuse and exploitation of children on the internet, cyber tip !CA. And in the US, the Department of State and also the Department of Homeland Security, and of course, international organizations such as Interpol Europol, Eurojust, and private organizations like the Thorn, Internet Watch Foundation, Stop the Traffic, and also partnerships between governments, academia, banks, industries, FBOs such as Caritas, NGOs such as Traffic Analysis Hub, analyzing or using artificial intelligence to identify, but a much more considerable effort is definitely needed. And what is needed is also to have governments, international organizations like UNICEF and ITU, and civil society, in particular access providers, mobilize more to limit and ultimately eradicate this scandalous abuse of technology to which millions of children are subjected. And eventually, it's the political will of legislators that must be mobilized to this end. Paolo, anything to say?
Well, I think the production of report and knowledge coming from different sources is extremely important and valuable. As I said, this is a fast changing landscape.
Oh.
So it's really important that different organizations coming from different angles produce these reports and then they share it so that we can build knowledge and then also keep it up to date. And I think it's important that enough resources are devoted and given to NGOs so that they also can produce reports and evidence. As you mentioned, reports coming from international organizations, Interpol, Europol, Eurojust, incredibly important because, as I said, there is this transnational dimension. Reports coming from law enforcement, very important because they have a perspective that it's unique. Reports coming from the ground, from the victim's perspective, very important. And I think NGOs and the observatories are the best place to give us these insights. Law enforcement can give us insights about the modus operandi of offenders, but to understand the vulnerabilities of the victims and the weak points, I think NGOs have an important role to play. I'm really conscious that NGOs are stretched. They are under huge pressure. They first and foremost need to provide assistance to victims. So they might not always have time to produce reports. But I think it's important that governments can assist and help also financially NGOs, government and international organizations to generate this knowledge base. I think we have more knowledge base in relation to child sexual exploitation than adult THB in relation to technology.
Thank you. What I wanted also to mention, of course, NGOs, as you say, some of them are advocating prostitution, saying, no, it's okay, it's a freedom of, some of them are, on the contrary, not happy with prostitution, which they qualify as a form of slavery or human trafficking. And I'm of this opinion, actually. Also, some medias, some medias, including South China Morning Post, including CNN, including Arte, including other TV channels, have been very active also in researching and documenting, and then disseminating these facts. But actually, what we need, and on this, I would like to mention the Santa Marta Group, because as you know, the Santa Marta Group is a peculiar coalition of religious congregations and police authorities trying to work together. And some people have been astonished to see that working, but I know people telling me, we tried between European government and an African government to locate traffickers, and we came nowhere. And actually, we asked a religious congregation who was on the spot.
Mm.
And in a few days, they told us exactly where they were and what they were doing, because actually you need boots on the ground, so to speak. And that could be also one way to deal with things. Because I see also another question, Daniel Bosser, ASEAN. Of course, ASEAN has a treaty, has a charter, has intent, but it's vague. It's not too concrete. And actually, what we need is to have more, as Brenna Wallace is saying, we need more robust tools, not only for investigators, but also for prosecutors. We need also, yes, to train to train police. We need to train the judges because if you are not training people, they will not identify victims. They will not identify traffickers. And obviously, if you have technology in addition to this, they are completely at loss. So actually, I think we should go on with this discussion. I must tell you, I'm very grateful to you, Paolo, for being tonight here. I'm also very grateful for the more 100 attendants tonight, And again, very grateful because some of them are far away, some of them possibly have time differences. But God willing, we reach out of the familial circles in Geneva at the UN or in academic circles in the UK and or regional organizations like the prestigious Council of Europe Greta group of experts. This is very important, but what we definitely need to combat this scourge, this monster, and especially using technology, is to have a very broad coalition,
Yes.
of various experts. Some of them will be legal, some of them will be technical, some of them will be conducting investigations or conducting advocacy and so on. But we need to do so. And for me, I think also we need to have survivors, victims and survivors, because they know how they were trapped. They know how they were mishandled. And possibly they know better how to denounce. Of course, it's not easy to denounce when you put yourself in the limelight. Quite often you are hesitant to say, here's what happened to me, if it's not so pleasant, not only because of psychological scars, but I would say because, of course, of social shame. And that's why it's very interesting that we go on with this. I must say, also, I'm grateful that many people from Colombia, and they were saying, "Oh yes, we are from the police." And I say, "Thanks for being with us." We need also not only your participation, but possibly if you have a feedback, if you have your own experiences, or if you have questions you would like us to answer. We definitely are ready, and possibly Paolo Campana is also open to online questions. And you have to know so that we have one online course on human trafficking, It's both in English and in French, and we hope to translate it into next month in Spanish and Italian. But that could be also useful for people who want to know more. And again, very happy to share with you a wealth of knowledge. I can tell you that we have a website, Christus Liberat, where we put best practices, and try to have a look at this. We put best practices also, for example, plans of action, national plans of action. You know, France has a national plan of action. The US has a national plan of action. I'm pretty sure other, and quite often those plans of action are, of course, broad, general, nevertheless interesting. And I think we might all learn from each other and try to look at this website. And again, you know, we have we will have another website that will be on the 6th of October, and the 6th of October it will be on Laudato Si with Father Fabio Baggio and Andrea Marchesani, and I think this might also be interesting for all of you. And indeed, the title is Human Trafficking in Laudato Si Towards a New Paradigm to Ensure the Protection of Human Dignity to Prevent and Eradicate Human Trafficking. Because definitely, I would say we need to build public conscience, to say things are unacceptable. We need to do something against this. We need to prevent it. We need to provoke to combat this. And if not, we will be in very serious condition. Paolo, would you like to add a few words?
Well, I just want to say that I fully agree with this idea of having coalitions, and since it's a multifaceted issue, complex issue with different angles. And as I said at the very beginning, I think it complements very well that there is not one magic action that we can take and solve the issues. So we need to take different actions. We have a set of actions and tools. Each one will address part of the problem, and some actions are best taken by international organizations, others by national governments, others by NGOs, and religious organizations have a role to play. And so I think, since given the complexity of the issues, the answer lies in coalitions. Coalitions motivated by the same goal, which is protecting the victims and protecting victims and decreasing and eradicating, well, hopefully, THB, both child sexual exploitation and adult victims. And the Santa Marta group, I think it's an interesting group because, in a sense, we have to think out of the box and, well, things about coalitions that we would not normally think of. And this, I think, it's a nice example of be creative with our coalitions.
Yes, Paolo. So, thank you. I think I will now close this webinar, but I'm very grateful to you. I'm very grateful, of course, to Don Fortunato. Very grateful to all participants, and please let's stay all in touch because you know where to reach us. And actually, I would like also to thank Yves Reichenbach, who is sitting next to me, our webmaster, and my assistant in Geneva, Clara Breguet-Izepi. Please take note that the video recording of this webinar shall be available in a few days on our website at laudatosi.org with subtitles in English, French, German, Italian, Russian, Spanish, and Chinese. Feel free to share the link. And of course, our English online course on human trafficking for helpers is available in French and English on the CUHD.org website. And I wish you all the best and invite you to our upcoming webinar on Thursday, the 6th of October at 6 p.m. Central European Summer Time. And now, thanks and best wishes to all, and goodbye, Paolo. Thank you. Bye-bye.